And ultimately, my stories find their way into the annals of humankind. I'd like to tell you one story that haunts me. It took place 400 years ago in New England. There was a tiny village, and on the very edge of the village lived an old crone. She had spiky gray hair that looked like it had never seen a comb or a brush or anything else. She had a nose, and on one side there was a wart. Then, she knew her neighbors, and her neighbors knew her. They felt that she was quite harmless. They went to her for medicines because she was very knowledgeable about the herbs that grew behind her cottage. And they would come to her, the young and the old, and they would say, "Oh, I have a horrible toothache," and she would have a remedy. What is this rash? And she would have a remedy. Women in labor would send for her because she had a way to cut the pain. She had a way to start your digestive system or make it a little solider, more solid. She would help the men with their husbandly duties. Then, one day, for no reason, a young woman appeared with the old crone. And people were curious, of course, and the old crone introduced her as her granddaughter. Well, the villagers kind of scratched their heads. They had never seen her with a husband, nor had they ever seen her with a child. So where did the granddaughter come from? They accepted it because they accepted the old crone. Well, the crone would teach the young lady how to find the herbs and how to prepare the remedies, how to make poultices so that the wounds could heal cleanly. But the men in the village watched that young lady. She was quite comely. She had beautiful dark hair and dark eyes, and she had a fine shape for a young woman. And they would follow her with their eyes, oftentimes being interrupted by a slap on the arm from their wives or sweethearts. But the men, young and old, still liked to watch her. One day, she left the cottage by herself, and the young woman went down the path toward the meadow and into the woods where she could find some of those remedies. And she was picking leaves here and roots there and putting them in her basket. But there was a man who saw her go down that pathway. As an observer, I have no idea what was in his heart, but his actions were suspicious. He would look around to make sure no one saw him. And then he followed that young woman into the forest. He found her. He watched her from behind trees and bushes. And then when he started out toward her, all of a sudden in his path was the biggest, blackest dog you had ever seen. If that dog had stood on his hind legs, he could have put his paws on the shoulders of that man. And his teeth were bared. His fangs were showing. And he was growling deep in his throat. Well, the man, of course, was scared. He pushed the dog away, turned around and ran. His foot caught a root and he fell flat. He lay there, saying his goodbyes, praying that the dog would leave him alone. The next sound he heard was the young woman. "Are you all right? Oh my, you have a big gash in your leg. Let me fix that." And she had the herbs in her basket, and she was able to wrap it up, and using a piece of cloth, she tied it off and sent him on his way. Well, he got home and he had to explain what was going on to his wife. "Well, where did you do this?" "I was in the forest." "Well, why were you in the forest?" Just taking a walk." She was suspicious too. And finally, she got the story out of him. He told her how he got the gash. He told her about the young woman putting the poultice on it. And that night, after she had served him dinner, she unwrapped the wound to make sure that everything was healing correctly. And the wound was healed. Just a tiny scar on his leg remained. Well, the next day she had to tell her neighbor what had happened. And she told her about the fact that the wound had healed. That's not possible. If it needed a poultice, it had to have been deep enough to have been bleeding. But it was all healed. I think she's a witch. You think? Well, why did she show up out of nowhere? How do we know she's really the granddaughter of that old crone? And if you watch the men, young and old, watch her walk, listen to everything she says, tries very hard to hear her laughter. She's a witch. Well, gossip, like wildfire, spreads quite quickly. And soon every woman in that village knew that there was a witch living amongst them. And they riled up their husbands. They went to the pub and riled everyone up, gave them strong drink, and of course they were quite suggestible then. And they got their torches. And they marched together as a mob, yelling, screaming for the old crone and the young woman. They hit the edge of the village, and there stood the cottage, quite serene, the thatched roof, the clean doorstep. But they yelled and they screamed for the old woman and her granddaughter until they came out and said, "What? You are a witch. We accuse you of being a witch." I'm not a witch." "No, she's not." Well, they shoved the women back inside that cottage and they barred the door so they couldn't open it. And then they set the roof on fire. Oh, the sad, sad sounds that rent the night as they burned alive inside that cottage. And soon the mob realized what they had done. They turned around and slunk back to their own homes. As an observer, I could not tell them to stop. I could not even hold my hand up so they could see me. And to this day, that's the one incident that I observed that causes me heartache. Because I asked myself, which is worse? Being a suspected witch, or being a gossip that can cause all sorts of havoc?